There are a lot of different kinds of horror. There's the horror that someone like me feels when they think about how on earth they're going to go about recording footage for the Xbox 360 games they have to cover in a few months' time.
And what do you use the computer for?
Well, for keeping household records, such as what I have in the freezer.
There's the horror that you feel when watching a horror movie. That's never really been a problem for me. I find horror movies weirdly fascinating. I've never had to hide behind my hands or look away from the screen when I'm watching a horror movie. It might be because of my education background. I did a degree in film, so they don't quite hit as hard maybe when you know the mechanics. But still, even before that, I used to stay up at night watching horror films, being fascinated by how they made me feel. If you've never seen the movie Cube, please go and see the movie Cube, it's excellent.
A cube.
26 rooms high, 26 rooms across.
17,576 rooms.
Anyway, after this there's the horror of a horror video game. And this will make me wet myself and run away crying. This is the horror I can't just push through using my intrinsic Geordie ruggedness. There's something about the interactivity that makes video game horror far, far more terrifying than any other kind. When I'm watching a film, I'm just interested to see what they do next. In a game, I decide what happens next. I'm choosing to walk through that door. I'm deciding to risk everything to pick up that extra item, or leave it for a safer path, potentially screwing myself in the future. Jump scares that happen when you're choosing to walk into them are just a different animal entirely. That kind of high-pressure, adrenaline-pumping stuff is why I don't really play horror games. I love the premise of a lot of them, some of the stories are amazing, and I'd like to watch them as movies, but I've learned over the years I simply won't push forward in the game if it's too scary. So I've stopped spending money on them. Except for a select few. There was something about Resident Evil 2 that just appealed to me far more than the original ever did. Sometimes the things that break the boundaries and plough the furrow don't reap the rewards, and in this case, while obviously Resi 2 takes essentially the same gameplay and runs with it, it runs a long way. If you have problems with the tank controls, then this isn't going to change your mind. By modern standards, this is almost impossible to handle. The characters move and turn incredibly slowly. It feels like it takes an age to raise your weapon to fire, and when you do squeeze the trigger, it's anyone's guess what direction that bullet is going in. The cinematic camera makes every scene look fantastic, but it makes lining up a shot a bit difficult, as there's no iron sights or over the shoulder here, although there is a fairly generous auto aim. Or you can get up close and personal before removing the head, which adds to the lovely risk-reward balance of the whole thing. If you're not into that, then there's nothing here for you. You have to fully buy into the idea, be it cope or truth, that this is all an intentional move to make the survival part of survival horror make sense. You have to feel weak and vulnerable and slow, and these controls definitely added to that. And the fact that they kept that control scheme right through more modern entries into the 2000s suggests they fully bought into what they were saying. But you might just see it as poor design, and that's fair. Nevertheless, the advances here are numerous. The visuals, for a start, are sensational. These hand-drawn backgrounds really helped bridge the gap between the amazing cartoon art style we were capable of at this time, and the nascent 3D polygonal content that was almost a requirement here in order to prove your game was next-gen enough. Capcom realised that an entirely polygonal world wouldn't look realistic enough to be properly immersive, to be scary. So we got these beautiful environments, obviously hand-drawn by incredible artists, to really bring Raccoon City to life. It's another example of the technique used in Final Fantasy VII, where the only real 3D object in the environment is the player and the enemies, with everything else drawn in by hand and overlaid on the inside of a crude polygonal box. That's why the camera angles are all static, but it does also give the game a cinematic feel, because it plays with fun perspectives that really show off all that detail. The way the game mimics the look of a movie by using cinematic camera angles is a bit like how Gran Turismo mimics television coverage by using those camera angles in its replays. Even though the virtual camera is not constrained by physics, they don't have to use those angles. Nonetheless, realism is not the aim. Fidelity to another medium is the aim. In this case, film and TV. This would be an example of what we call in academia intermediality, which just means when something in one medium, like games, specifically tries to recreate the look, feel, or content of another medium, like film or TV. And now you've learned something that you can impress people with at parties. It also helped sell the game prior to release because every single screenshot I looked at over and over in PlayStation Plus looked absolutely gorgeous.
Sorry about that. When I saw the uniform, I thought you were another zombie.
The other standout feature is that we're in the city now. Okay, so mostly the sense of freedom is limited to the opening sections, after which you're almost entirely in the police station, which is essentially just a mansion stand-in. While we're on the subject though, Raccoon City desperately needs a public spending audit. Look at this. Sacrifice to the fire. I don't know about this police station, you guys. The environments were more varied throughout though, and it felt more like a journey of survival rather than the small, limited puzzle box of the original. The exploration has been streamlined too. Don't get me wrong, you'll still be backtracking through areas to open doors with new keys, but it feels a bit more like a linear progression than before. I rarely found myself lost or unaware of what to do next, something I ran into frequently in the Spencer Mansion when I played the original later on.
Leon!
It's good to see you're still among the living.
The expansion onto 2 CDs brought with it multiple scenarios for each character, Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield, and an A and B scenario, so as well as playing once through with each, you could play through a second time and encounter new events, including the snappiest dresser of all the tyrants, Mr. X. It's tough to argue you didn't get your money's worth here. The lasting impression for me though was that I was able to play it through to completion without noping out after the first few jump scares. I think a lot of this was down to the presentation being slicker and more refined, with a story that just begged you to uncover one more twist, one more secret, and presented in a way more in keeping with a Hollywood movie. I needed to see what was next, even if it terrified me, and that kept me going to the end. It was also arguably slightly easier, with a bit more ammo lying around, certainly on the easier difficulties, which is what I played because I'm not a masochist. And perhaps it's because this leaned more towards being an action-adventure than a survival horror. Although it should be noted that a lot of the fear generated here comes not from the shambling hordes, but from the worry that you might back yourself into a corner. The game gives you a limited number of saves, and with ammo scarce and pocket space even scarcer, it was entirely possible to save yourself into a no-win situation, and the thought of having to go back through everything again did feel like something that would just make me drop the whole thing. Small gripes aside, Resident Evil 2 found a really satisfying balance between survival horror and action. Capcom would learn the value of tinkering with that balance much later with Resident Evil 4, but for now this one did the trick and fully established the franchise as one that would endure long into the future. It certainly made a lifelong fan out of me. And if you're wondering about the cultural impact this game had, well, did you ever see the TV show Spaced?
What are you playing? It's a subtle blend of lateral thinking and extreme violence.
What? Like it's a knockout?
There's no reason for us to stay any longer than necessary. Let's split up, look for any survivors, and get out of here.
Now come on! There's no need for us to be here any longer than necessary. Let's split up, look for survivors, and get out of here!
I understood that reference.